All right, welcome to the Kink Tank, episode whatever it is. This episode we're going to be talking about changing roles and reputations in the BDSM community. And this is something that we've been wanting to talk about for quite a while. But as I was kind of digging into it, putting some questions together and deciding what direction that we could take this, it's got some depth to it. But this originally started off as a conversation about changing roles. So if you're a dominant and you want, you over the course of your time in BDSM with your partner or in the community that you decide that that orientation doesn't really work much for you anymore and that you prefer bottoming. How do you make that transition? How is that, what are the potholes and pitfalls to it? But then it also sort of turned into just growing and changing in the community as a reputation. And Shane, you had brought up some good points about that too. So where do you guys want to start? Any place in particular?
See, I thought we were going to talk movies. Like, now all discombobulated.
Well, yeah, Shane and I came up with another topic for probably 2 weeks from now that I think might make some fun. By the way, we are back on Thursday night tonight. But 2 weeks from now, we're going to bump it a couple of days ahead of time for Christmas. So we'll actually be doing this on the 23rd rather than the 25th, kind of like we did for Thanksgiving. So back to the question: changing reputation and changing orientation, changing your label. I don't know. Thoughts?
Well, and we're talking about within the greater community, but also within our individual relationships, or just...
Yeah, I think that's probably a big element that we shouldn't be ignoring tonight, because originally, the topic was sort of conceived as in the community. All right, I'll start with this. Sometimes somebody comes into the community and they are certain of their orientation, and they talk to people and they relate to people with that orientation, dominant, switch, submissive, daddy, girl, whatever they decide. And they go along merrily for a few years. And then somewhere along the line, something flips a switch with them, that they've discovered something about themselves that they didn't know before. They were introduced to something that they'd never heard of for whatever reason, and they decide, I'm not really much of a submissive. I'm kind of a masochist, but I'm more interested in topping people, okay? And that can sometimes cause some dissonance, I guess, with the person themselves, with the people that they may have relationships with, and with the community around them that have a certain, image in their mind of them. It can be tough. Agreed?
Yeah. I think it can also sometimes be really easy, and the trick there is that you really don't know which one you're going to fall into. Some of those can very organically change. And I don't know if that's because your partner is really good at communicating with you, or you're really good at communicating with your partner. I don't know. But I guess that's where it becomes difficult, is because you kind of have to be ready for it to be a conversation that you may have to have more than once, or,
Right. Treating your lifestyle choices as something fluid, that you don't have to declare a major and then stick with it once you've come into the community or in a relationship. But that can sometimes mess with chemistry a little bit when somebody that you're relating to, that you're dating, that you're married to, for instance, and in bed or otherwise in a sort of authority structure, suddenly things are changing and you're not feeling so much that way. Suddenly your slave is feeling maybe they aren't so slavey anymore. The master is feeling like maybe vanilla is kind of his thing now. And that can cause issues. But probably the best place to start is, let's talk about the labels that we use. Because it occurs to me that we have a lot of labels for a lot of different things, and we like to put labels on ourselves, and we like to put labels on other people to sort of sort them into piles, I guess. Why is this even a conversation that we're having? So what if somebody decides yesterday they were submissive, but today they think they're a switch?
Well, some relationships are built on that foundation, and that can cause the problem because you've structured your relationship around that dynamic. If you have a very structured, kind of rule-based power dynamic with somebody where you're exchanging actively, you're aware of that exchange being a huge part of your relationship, and then you decide that you don't want to be on the bottom anymore, that can kind of, mess up your dynamic with your partner. You don't know how to be around them anymore. But I think it can go the other way too, where you've had a certain relationship with a person, and maybe you want a different kind of relationship. So if a way that I show my partners that I care about them is through service, and my partner is not at all interested in service, I think that can cause for maybe hurt feelings that can then kind of blossom into this whole kind of big relationship problem. I guess that's one of the problems I see that can kind of happen when this kind of change is discussed within a smaller relationship unit, like a single partner and a single partner between each other.
Mm-hmm. Well, and I can also see where someone in the relationship, the person who's not changing. Okay, I'm a master and I own a slave, and at some point my slave wakes up to the fact, or grows, changes in a certain direction that says, you know what, I don't feel like ownership is what our relationship is, and I don't feel like I belong to you anymore, et cetera, et cetera. Or I'm not interested in serving you anymore, I'm interested in this or that. That doesn't just mess up the dynamic, but I think that can also cause feelings of failure to the other person. So if you're not feeling
to some extent it is.
If you're not feeling like a slave, then that is, that's because of some shortcoming of mine. And maybe you're right, Shane.
This is a real story, and I apologize. It sounds like I'm cutting you off. Your audio cutting out on my end, so I don't know you're done talking. So I'm not intending to go off. So my apology.
Mm-hmm.
And I find it interesting about this.
Are you having trouble, Josie, hearing him?
Yes.
Okay. Well,
we're talking about a chain relationship that essentially says, I don't relate to you the same way anymore. That's one thing. But I've dealt with people who have felt that how they relate to people or how they choose to express themselves just. So I have seen is that the dynamic in a relationship remains the same, but that then might be interested in playing a different style with people, which has its own set of problems. But I have felt when people have this real issue, like we're in a particular set of a dynamic between us, and that worked for me anymore. A lot of times I think that's a reflection of the relation, not just an ultimate change in that person. I've seen people, I don't feel like I can do anymore, or totally that person over there.
Okay.
Not necessarily a change in roles.
Let me stop you, because we only got a few words of what you said. I need you to log out and log back in, because you sound like Max Headroom, man. It's
sure, I can do that.
Got a bad connection. All right. I think I just told everybody how old I am when I said he sounded like Max Headroom. But maybe we can get him to reboot and come back in. Did you catch the gist of what he was getting at? I was too busy trying to type to him.
I think he was trying to say about a specific instance to him where his relationship had changed. Mm-hmm. And I think he was more getting onto that issue of it being a failure because it was structured to be that way. So he was talking about it in terms of failure versus, right. I guess.
Well, and I could see where, maybe in some cases that is a failure on the part of the partner. We were talking about this one or two Kink Tanks ago, people that have gotten in over their expectations, they've agreed to something and they're not following through on it. Well, it is tough for somebody to feel like they belong to you when you're not doing the work to make them feel owned. But it could. I'm not saying that that's the cause of these things or that's always what happens. I'm saying that in some cases it's probably a little bit of that, and in some cases it might be some other completely different, unrelated personal growth that the person's going through. Some
Well, and it
life
can
change of some kind.
organically.
Sure. And
Or
gradually.
right, but I think sometimes people feel pressured to change their relationship dynamic because something's not exactly the way they wanted it to be. And I kind of always would suggest to people that that's the wrong way to do it. That's kind of the baby out with the bathwater kind of a problem.
Okay.
So I would rather tweak something small or I'm always telling people this. You have to ask for what you need. If your partner doesn't know that something is important to you, you don't stop that relationship completely. I guess so we have to decide how much compromise that other person is willing to do and how much is appropriate.
Okay. Shane, can we hear you now?
I can hear you. It seems to be bad. So, can you hear me all right?
Not really.
Cutting out a lot.
Yeah, it's pretty bad.
Let me restart the computer. No, let me my computer then. I'll be back.
All right.
But yeah, so going with this, if we're talking about, we're in a relationship and I want, like I was saying before, an example that I have heard recently is that person, they show that they care about someone by doing services for that person. That person didn't want services from them. And I wonder, how much of that can be compromised, especially if it's a service that requires, basically all it requires of you is patience. It doesn't require any effort. It doesn't require any change. If that person just wants to do something for you, maybe service isn't your thing, but maybe there's some give and take to be had there.
Mm-hmm.
I know I would be willing to have that conversation with somebody on either side, receiving or giving it, because it seems to me like an easy thing to accommodate both ways. But it's hard to have that conversation if you're not kind of willing to put yourself out there, because you have to brace yourself for the answer to be no. And then that kind of leads us into that other conversation of, well, what do you do after that? Because that would demand a change in role or a change in relationship completely.
Mm-hmm. Well, I agree. It's not an easy. I think any kind of change that we're talking about, when we're talking about power dynamics, sometimes we're talking about the root of the relationship. So if that changes, then I know that there are a lot of people in relationships, and I'm probably in some myself, where if that happened, where the person that I'm relating to said, this DS thing that we're doing doesn't really work for me. Let's go to some sort of equal or egalitarian or sort of two-dom relationship or something like that. I don't know. That's not really what I signed on for. I don't think I can be. Sure, you're talking about some compromise or some flexibility that maybe you can, if you're that into the person. But as Shane sometimes says, when your relationship flows from the power exchange, then you're pretty much turning the whole thing upside down. And I don't know that that's always going to be able to be salvaged. And it probably depends on the degree of changes that are going on. If it means, I'm not really interested in bottoming for you anymore, but I'm still very interested in serving you. Or I'm not very interested in beating you anymore, but I am very interested in being served by you. So that might be a little bit different than I'm just not a top, baby. I'm a bottom, and that's how we're gonna, do things from now on, or that's how I need things to be. And not only that, but it needs to be you who compliments me in this. That could be devastating, really, I think.
Well, and in that situation, would you prefer for someone to kind of give you subtle clues that they are kind of wanting to go in a different direction, or would you prefer kind of a blunt, upfront, we need to have a conversation because I've been thinking and I need this, you know, a really blunt conversation?
I like to think that most people don't make big decisions like that on a dime. They might be reluctant to say something in the course of the relationship that they're starting to feel a little bit differently because, you know, you don't want to rock the boat either. You know, I'm your slave, I belong to you, and I'm kind of feeling like maybe this isn't right for me, but hey, maybe this is a phase. Maybe this is something that's just kind of going wrong with me. Maybe I'll just get back into the groove and it's all good. And then, you know, finally when you get to the point where you realize that this is actually a change that's happening that needs addressing for your happiness, you know, you're kind of instigating that conversation a little bit late in the game, but I don't know that you can always, you know, I don't know that that's necessarily a bad thing. I wouldn't want somebody to come to me and try to renegotiate the power in our relationship, sort of at gunpoint. You know, this is
Right.
happening now, and something needs to change.
Before you go to that person, you go like with your plan that you laid out by yourself in your mind. That can be really difficult because at that point you've already had, you know, 6 weeks that you've been thinking about this, and now you're confronting me with it, and all of a sudden I have to either go along or decide that the relationship is over in, you know, at the drop of a dime at gunpoint, as you're saying, and I think that's pretty unfair. I wish somebody could weigh in on whether they've tried that before and kind of what the consequences of that were, because for some people maybe it works.
Yeah,
I mean, for me,
maybe 1% of the time, the other person says, "Oh God, I'm so glad you said something because I was, you know, like
yeah.
I'm feeling exactly the same way." I think that's pretty unlikely, but
Or they're thrilled that you spoke your mind. I mean, they're just like, all right, well, let's figure out what we're going to do about this. I know for me, I'm probably a lot more likely to take a subtle kind of testing the water kind of an approach. So, you know, if I am really into, I don't know, you know, if I want somebody, I want to have like a daddy relationship with somebody, and I'm not sure if they're into that kind of thing or if they'd be interested into it with me, I'm kind of the person who might kind of try to slip it in there. I might call you by that name once, kind of when you're not expecting it, and just kind of see what your reaction is.
right.
I might just kind of test the waters in that way. I feel like I get a lot of flack on here from people telling me that introverts have a hard time with everything that you're saying. And I feel like this is one of those instances where you can, I mean, I feel like that's kind of the introvert's approach, and I think it can be pretty effective. Thanks, Zach.
Well, maybe I'm back.
Yeah, man, you sound great now.
You sound good.
Yeah, I think there was an app choke that was trying to download something.
So say everything you were saying before.
Right.
Say everything I was saying before.
Yeah.
Yes.
That's the problem. Like James Brown, it happens once and that's it. You know, you kind of catch the magic or you don't. No, what I was trying to say earlier, and I apologize because obviously I've missed some stuff being logged out, but I find this is really interesting and complex because the last place that we had left off, or the thing that spurred the thought, was when Michael had said, you know, unfortunately when some of these things happen, it can seem like a failure in the relationship, and unfortunately I don't know that that's necessarily far from the truth in some of these contexts, because what I have seen is that people who have a dynamic-based relationship, when one of those people says, I just don't relate to you in that way anymore, they often internalize that. Like, obviously, you being my master, you being my dominant isn't working for me anymore. But often I've seen that as being a reflection of the relationship, not of being a personal change. But people internalize that and say, well, maybe it's not working because I'm not a submissive, as opposed to I don't feel like I'm your submissive anymore. And so you see this urge to explore because they think that role that they've taken on doesn't apply to them anymore. But that to me is often a reflection of the quality of the relationship, not really an internal change. It's really a struggle to understand why the relationship isn't working, and maybe I am just not fit for the role that I'm in. But I think a lot of times it's really I'm not relating to the person in the same way with that same power orientation. What I have seen more commonly, though, are people who say, our relationship is great, but I'm getting this urge to do other things. Not necessarily with you, because I feel really confident in our relationship and the way that dynamic runs. I feel perfectly happy as your slave, submissive, dominant master, but I feel really compelled to try other things with other people. Like, I want to explore that, but I just don't feel that way about you. So I will always feel like you're submissive, but I really have an urge to top. I just don't see me doing that with you, so do you mind if I go out and learn how to tie people up or learn how to do whatever?
Yeah, I think you bring up a very interesting and true point, and that is, where you're sort of laying the blame, as it were, for this change. It's not really blame, but when you're trying to identify the cause, and some people, they don't feel the same relationship they had with their person as they did before, or they don't feel as strongly dominant or submissive or sexual or whatever that they had between them. They kind of blame it on the dynamic rather than the relationship as a whole, and that's
Exactly.
probably a mistake to say, well, I guess I'm just not submissive. Well, actually, the answer is, I guess you're losing your submission to this person. For some reason, you're not feeling that way towards them anymore. But that doesn't mean that when you break up and you go put yourself out on the market again, hey, I'm kinky and I'm open and ready to play, that you need to change your power orientation over that. It didn't work with that particular person, but that doesn't mean that isn't your authentic orientation, I guess.
But you do see that sometimes. I have seen people who come out of relationships and blame what they perceive as a shift in their power orientation for a failure in the relationship and feel compelled to sort of self-profess themselves in that regard.
Mm-hmm.
And it's funny because you see it in these very odd ways. Like, I see it at SIG sometimes where people show up, 1 month at the submissive table, the next month at the switch table, and then the next month at the dominant table.
Mm-hmm.
Like there's this, that's the smooth transition now.
Well, what happened, let's talk a little bit about the community then, because that's something that, if you noticed that, and for those of our viewers who aren't sure what he's talking about, in our community we have a discussion group that is basically split up into 3, with dominance in one area, submissives in another, and switches in another. And it's for people who identify as one of those 3 things, top, master, dominant, slave, submissive, bottom, switch, for people that are firm in their power orientation. But sometimes those things do change. How often do they change? And are we in danger of using switch as just sort of a catch-all? Like
indecisive.
Well, that was one of the things, is that when we were creating the groups, Ms. Constance and I, we were basically saying, well, we don't want people who are like, well, I don't know what I am, so I'll sit at the switches table. No. If you sit at the switches table, you know that you are a switch. If you don't know, then you should probably not come to this meeting, do some exploring and so forth. But why is that hard? Like, when somebody switches tables, it's a very obvious thing. It's not like they just changed the little thing on their FetLife account that some people caught and other people didn't. They're at a gathering and they're sitting at the other table. What happens? It seems like our minds go, whoa, why is that so important? I mean, why do we get thrown by that?
Yeah, they really seem to struggle with people who don't like to choose. And I think I'm one of those confusing people that doesn't like to choose. And it does kind of make people wary of you. Because you don't have a box, they're not really sure what to do with you, they don't know what you're into. And I think that's funny, because in this community we're always talking about, we're weirdo friendly and we accept weird people, but that's too weird. Like, that crosses some sort of a line. If you're going to be a weirdo, you at least have to say what kind of weirdo you are.
Yeah, but the problem is, though,
With
I mean,
that comes a set of rules and responsibilities. So I understand why people want to do that. It's the same as people who are uncomfortable with people who say they're bisexual, because you don't know how to treat them. I think they don't know how to lay out their expectations for people that are very organized or people that are very, like, methodical about how they do things. And I'm not going to say that's right or wrong, because that's not really fair for anybody to say. If that's how you deal with things, that's how you deal with things. But I think it's definitely problematic.
Okay.
But from my perspective, it's interesting because when I'm talking to somebody, you know, if I am looking at the possibility of pursuing a relationship and they say I'm a switch, I will tell you right now, for me personally, that's a red flag. And I don't mean that that person is a red flag, but I know what kind of relationships I like to have. And if somebody tells me they're a switch, it's going to prompt more questions, right? What kind of switch are they, in the sense of, are they the kind of person who likes to switch within the context of that individual relationship? Are they the kind of switch who likes to have one type of relationship that feels comfortable with them with one person and a different kind of relationship as the sort of the relationship dictates, you know, fluid in that sense, because I know what kind of power exchange relationships I like to have, and all I'm saying is that I'm not a switch. So if somebody is looking for that within the context of a relationship, I know that person's not going to be happy, without even talking about whether or not I'm going to be comfortable with that situation or not. So if somebody came up to me that I was in a relationship with who was a bottom to me of some flavor, whatever that happens to be, and says, listen, I think I'm interested, or I think I might be a switch, I'm going to want to know what that means to them. It's not a matter of identifying or creating a box, but it is possibly a sea change to the relationship. And I've had that situation with people in the past who have said very clearly, no, this has nothing to do with what our relationship is going to do, but I'm interested in pursuing some other opportunities and playing around with some different power orientations or some different play styles, whether playing from the top with other people. I'm perfectly happy with our relationship. But going into a relationship, I'm going to want to know, if somebody identifies as a switch, what that means for them and how that looks in terms of their relationships. It's not that it's confusing or odd. It's just that because I know what kind of relationships I want to have, I just know there's a chance it might not work. It might not be compatible based on what they're looking for.
So can you deal with your relationship dynamic changing? I think when you had logged off, I asked Michael, you know, if the partner wants to change, you know, are you comfortable with that? And if you are, would you prefer kind of a blunt meeting of the minds, you know, something along the lines of, hey, this has been bothering me, or I think I might want to do this, or, you know, would something more subtle be something that you would prefer, you know, like them dropping some hints or them doing actions that kind of clue you in that maybe they're interested in something else?
Subtle never works for me. I'm a big fan of, like, clear baseball bat communication, for one.
Yeah,
it's just the way I like to.
You paused for a second, and I was going to jump in there and answer for him because I already knew.
Yeah, I don't do subtle well, and I don't mean that as a pejorative. I just, one, I don't pick up on it, and two, for me personally, especially with the kind of relationships that I have, I find it a little bit passive aggressive. I'd rather get the blunt, brutal.
Change in general.
Pardon me?
So could you deal with a partner who wanted to change midway through your relationship?
Here's the answer. The answer is, it depends on how it's going to affect the relationship that I have with that person. If that person says, I don't want to be your submissive anymore, that's a much larger issue than I'm interested in topping somebody else. You understand what I'm saying? So if there was going to be a change to my dynamic in terms of the relationship I'm having, yeah, that's something that's going to be far more problematic. Am I going to sit here and say, well, that's the end of the relationship? No. But is there a good likelihood, depending on how far they wanted that change to go? I mean, are we talking about a change in some of the protocols, perhaps, that we have, or some of the rules that we have? That's certainly something I'm willing to negotiate. But if it's down to, listen, I just am not comfortable taking instruction from you, or I don't trust your judgment, or I don't want to rely on you for the kind of support information that I've gotten in the past, then yeah, that's going to be a much larger problem for me.
Let me take a short little pause here, because I realize that normally the way that I announce these things and get the information to people that want to come and participate got really screwed up tonight with my text messaging. It got all screwed up, and the text messages that I tried to send out didn't get sent out. So if anybody's watching this right now, because I'm looking in the question and answer section, and some people are looking for links to get in and join, and we'd like to welcome them into the conversation. So I don't have any good way of typing it out for you, so I'm just going to give you the link verbally. So get your pen and paper out right now, and I will tell you what to type in. Now, this is going to be a case-sensitive link, but it is http:// just like everything else. goo.gl, as in Google shortened, goo.gl / hang on, let me let these sirens pass. goo.gl / the number 4, lowercase letter s as in Samuel, capital letter V as in Victor, lowercase c as in Charlie, uppercase M as in Michael, uppercase I as in
Igloo.
And that's it. 4SVCMI. So come on in and join the chat. And hopefully, well, maybe we can get some other points of view in here too. Not that we don't have lots of points of view between the three of us in here. All right, so where were we? Let's try and get back.
Yes, relationship change would be odd depending on the relationship and depending on the changes requested. But yeah, we've had this in past conversations. My relationships that I choose to have now and going forward are power exchange relationships. So if that power exchange were something that were in question, then it stands to reason that the relationship goes in question. I'm not saying that's a guaranteed end to it, but it's certainly not the relationship or the relationship ideal that I'm looking for or that I was looking for when I got into that relationship. So yeah, it would definitely be more problematic for me. I know Michael has said in the past that he's okay with more vanilla relationships, but it's not what I'm interested in. So yeah, I mean, that's just understanding what I like and what I want. But that, again, that doesn't mean that the relationship is necessarily going to end. It just means that if the person was sincere about that interest, trying to find a way, because we have that good fortune of being poly, that there might be some alternatives that we could investigate for that. But if it was a direct, listen, the way that we relate needs to change, that's going to be a bigger issue.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and so basically what you're saying, if nothing or not much changes for me, then we're cool. No, that's not really fair. If nothing really changes in the context of our power exchange. Right. But I think that may be the case for you. I think for some people, I mean, we've touched on this in other conversations as well, that when I, as the owner of somebody or master of somebody,
oh, absolutely, I'll put it right up front. This is a personal thing. That's
right.
Me.
Right. That I want to bottom to someone. That may not change the dynamics or the power exchange at all between me and whoever it is that I'm relating to.
Right.
But somehow that trips them up. That,
oh, absolutely.
That the idea of me bottoming or serving or belonging to someone else kind of ruins it for them, and I think that's understandable too. I mean, I hate to make judgments about any of this stuff as far as like, well, that's stupid, that's just shallow, I don't know. I mean, some of this gets some of it's kind of fundamental to the way that we relate, and when you mess with the chemistry a little bit, a lot of shit can change, really. So, I mean, I sympathize with people that are going through changes, and if they can, like, swing with it and find a way to make it work, and that's great. And sometimes that means opening up your relationship to allow for play or interactions with other people. Sometimes it's compromise, but I think that when a relationship starts as a power exchange relationship and is negotiated as a power exchange relationship, it makes it even a little bit more difficult. Because I think a lot of the things have been sort of built around that, as opposed
Absolutely.
to
for me,
people.
I would agree with that.
For people that came together in a vanilla context and sort of built their kink out from that. And you'll have to excuse me. I'm having coughing fits here and there. So when you see me doing this with my mic muted, that means I'm having a coughing attack. So let's get back to community. I want to talk about community, because when I say community, what I mean is the in-person sort of munch community. Fetish parties, munches, sloshes, social events. I know that some people feel like, well, I'm on FetLife, I'm in the community. Well, it's not exactly what I'm talking about. But when somebody changes their FetLife profile, when somebody sits at a different table at the special interest group meetings, when someone just straight up says, yeah, I'm different now, or maybe they went away and came back, and now they're mistress so-and-so instead of slave so-and-so.
Which I've seen.
Yeah. Why do we care? You know, this is just a human nature thing. This is like people wanting to put people in different, you know, filing cabinet slots, and it screws everything up.
Here's the thing. I have an issue with this. Let me rephrase that. Let me back up, because that sounds worse than I intended it to. It's not that I have an issue with it. How we identify in the community, rightly or wrongly, for some reason, seems to position us in certain ways. There are some submissive types, slave types, I know are, for lack of a better term, elders in the community, people who've been around for a long time, very wise, very smart people that people go to for advice. But invariably, depending on the role that you assume as part of your public persona, and especially considering how long people have been around, people get asked for advice. So Mistress so-and-so might have been around for 10 years, but she might have only been Mistress so-and-so for 6 months. And so if people start asking, you know, new mistress, new master advice about things, I just start to wonder if they are necessarily representing themselves fairly to people who are seeking out advice from them, or information, or perhaps want a mentor. And so I personally try to be a little bit diligent about that, because I have seen some people who have made that transition and have made it very, very well. You can tell that it's just an earnest and honest change that they've experienced in their life. It's a personal growth, and I don't mean that going from bottom to top is the growth pattern. It could go either way, but you can tell that whatever change they've made is clearly part of what their personality is, clearly part of what their life is doing, and it's authentic.
Or maybe where they belonged in the first place, you know.
Well, possibly, but again, that's just part of that development. Maybe it is just an awareness of where they should be, but again, there doesn't seem to be any show about it. It doesn't seem to be a pretense. That being said, I have seen some people, at least in my experience, who have, say, come out of bad relationships where they were a bottom and said, screw this, I'm not doing this anymore, from now on I'm a top, and they use that as a defense mechanism, and their desire to identify as a top is not in earnest. It serves a personal purpose for them. And so I tend to be a little bit leery. You know, I'm a straight male bottom. Who would you recommend me talking to if I wanted to play with a female top? Well, I have a list of people that I might recommend, you know, certainly based on common personalities or interests. But if I see somebody who I think has made that transition in a non-genuine fashion, I would never recommend them, because I still think they've got some learning to do. And that may sound like a judgment call, but our lives are making judgments about other people.
And I think a lot of this does have to do with us trying to figure out how we interact with people. Because I know that, you know, labels are bad, but labels are useful, especially for people that you don't know very well. You know, I know the people in this room, I would say, fairly well, so I don't really need their label to know how I interact with them. But someone who's new, it can be a helpful tool. The thing that bothers me, I think I'm pretty tolerant. I think I normally have a pretty easy time of being okay with people who are kind of switch back and forth, or who just kind of change their orientation completely, and that's okay with me. What bothers me are the people who go from telling you, the ones who are very, very vocal about, I'm the slaviest of slaves, and look at me being all submissive, and I am just so good at this game, and then switch, you know, 3 days later to, I'm the toppiest of tops, and look at all these slave boys I have, and look how great I am, you should worship me. Those kinds of like schizophrenic changes are the ones that really bother me, because they seem a little more for show. Whether they are or not, I don't know. But they seem to me like they're for show. They seem to me like, in some ways, they become this kind of weird pissing contest between that person and anyone else who identifies the same way that week in the community. I think those people are the people who are generally the ones who are ill-received. The ones who switch from polar opposites.
It's interesting, Josie, because you make a point that I think is really important, which is, even in your example, the way that they describe themselves as being a bottom got on your nerves as much as them describing themselves as a top. And I think that what we're talking about is what we perceive as being a character flaw. Like people who want to brag about their label and about what they are, regardless of what they pick, are probably going to get when they switch as the mood strikes them.
Yeah. Well, and maybe it just comes off as disingenuous when you're so vocal about what you are. It's like you have to prove something. And I think that's usually what puts me on my guard, that I'm not trying to be intolerant of your life changes. I support you. But when you do that, it does. It kind of gives people pause about whether or not they kind of want to talk to you at all because you seem a little unbalanced, or you seem like you're putting on a show and we don't really care to tune in, kind of a problem.
Yeah.
We've all met people like this. I mean, they exist, and I think those people
probably the same people.
Right, and those people tend to be the most vocal about, the community's super intolerant to anyone who changes and all of that. Well, the community's not really that intolerant. You were just difficult to tolerate.
Mm-hmm. I also think that what they expected by making that change probably didn't, like you said, most people don't care how anybody identifies, because most of us aren't on the hunt for a partner. I know that the people in this room tend to be a lot more organic, so the label that you choose to represent yourself by generally doesn't matter to us. Like, we're not like, hey, new submissives, like, let's keep the radar open. So we don't care. We generally tend to treat people just as people. So like you said, when they tend to want to be very vocal about how they identify and they change, it's usually because they want some kind of response out of the community. And when they don't get that response because we really don't care, they want to blame us for not respecting their change. Well, we didn't care about what you were in the first place, so why would we respect a change that we didn't care about in the first place? And not that we don't care about the people, but if your power orientation doesn't affect us, then don't expect you changing it to affect us either.
Right. And there's a big difference between supporting someone in their change and then,
But people do want to act butthurt about it.
Right, right. And I do want to say, we might be a little biased in this conversation because we're not the kind of people who are super, super crazy, loud, and proud about how we are. Some people just want to be recognized as a slave by everybody, or they want to be recognized as a really great submissive or a really great dominant by everybody. So, maybe I'm just biased against those people because they're different than me. I think it's also pretty variable between communities. So, we're talking about there are more than one local community, and I think there's definitely a difference between treating people according to their power orientation in one community and in the other.
Yeah, I have seen that. I have seen some groups where people seem to have no time for bottoms or switches.
Well, or they really are uncomfortable with people changing or not choosing.
Yeah. And
so negotiating
I really don't care.
Right, but navigating that as a person who does care is really hard. So I guess that's why I was asking, if you're a top, you happen to be a top, both of you do. So, how does that person have that conversation comfortably with you? How does someone actually have that conversation in an environment that's accepting or not accepting? And that's kind of an interesting question.
Yeah, and I also the first munch that I went to, they had name tags, and there were 3 colors of Sharpie there, which was actually probably considered pretty liberated that they had 3 colors of Sharpie rather than just 2 at the time. But they wanted you to put your name, and they wanted you to use a color that identified you as top, bottom, or switch. And I felt like I knew what I was, but I'm glad. I mean, it can be tougher, I think, in some communities that have a certain etiquette that they're, a space that they're trying to make that revolves around people's power orientations, that the mistresses behave this way and the slave boys speak this way to them, or the Agorian community that a single slave girl is supposed to be this and do that. That's tough because, I mean, how does that leave any kind of fluidity, really? It's like, well, I'm kind of in transition. Okay, well, there's 3 Sharpies, so pick one. And I'm glad that our community in particular is not really like that, but I don't think that there are still people who feel like that's kind of the way it should be. And God forbid you ever switch to something and then switch back. Like that's just tough to take. Now I don't know what to do with you. Well, they're still a person. They're still the person that you were hanging out with at the munch. It's not like you're treating them differently, because we don't have an etiquette that says dominants act this way, submissives act this way. So I need to know what you are so I know how to talk to you. No, we generally, speak to people like people.
I mean, that being said, too, there are some communities where that is a prerequisite, this decision, in these very specialized communities like you're talking about, or in these meetings like, with the discussion group. I have been to a few of those. I had to stop going to them because I wasn't comfortable sitting at any table. That's not because I was discriminated against. I'm not going to go and then rail against this group for not being inclusive. Some groups are just not going to be for you. So a group that's going to require you to make that choice up front and to be concrete about it is probably not a group that I'm personally going to be a part of. But I find that that's not normally the larger kink community. There's specialized, smaller groups, and you shouldn't take that personally.
And interestingly, Josie, one of the conversations that we've had recently is actually adding a 4th table, which is this sort of undecided or new, yet to be determined group.
Okay. So here's a phenomenon. We might as well go ahead and talk about this. When we're talking about, let's say, minority orientations, female dominance, for instance, and somebody comes into the community and they're female dominant and they have their partner, maybe they don't have any partner, maybe they have 5 partners, maybe they own a stable of boys, doesn't matter. But I've seen that happen before, where there's a change that occurs with that person, and then there seems to be a sense of betrayal by other folks in the community. Like, we femdoms need to stick together because there's not very many of us, and or, for instance, in the case of female dominance, oh, great, now you're just reinforcing the idea that all she needed was the right top. It's kind of like the bisexual woman who, or the lesbian who starts dating men. It's like, you're a traitor to the cause. It seems like there is maybe a little bit of that goes on in certain orientations. And I would say probably female dominant and male submissive more so than the others, because male dominant and female submissive is what people sort of traditionally consider standard, I guess. Do you see that, hear about it, feel it, notice it?
Yeah, it was one of the questions I was going to ask, which was, I wonder how much social pressure there is in a group environment to maintain a label. Like, what does that label give you in terms of your social standing? And to Josie's point earlier about, like, say, slaves who want to rail about how great a slave they are, it almost, in some cases I've seen people who think, well, because I'm a slave, I'm not going to be taken seriously, so I better put out that I'm the best slave ever just so I can get some ear time. And I'm wondering how much of that there is where, people don't take me seriously in the community because I don't identify as X, Y, or Z. So I know people who identify as sort of little subgroups, and I don't mean in terms of power orientation, but they might be identifying as, say, a puppy or as a little or whatever, and that changes a lot because there's this desire to fit in somewhere, and so they move around. And I wonder how much of that is sort of the broad group creating a structure that, for lack of a better term, rewards certain people or certain orientations. Like, is our group more pro-male dominant, and so female dominant don't feel comfortable there? You know what I mean? I'll give you an example, and I always keep bringing it up, and it's a great specter to bring up because it doesn't exist anymore and there's less risk of offending. But when you look at a group like Paradox, they were clearly a male-dominant, female-submissive-oriented group, and if you didn't fit into that model, you were likely not going to be as well accepted. And I wonder how much of that still lingers in other groups. I mean, my experience is that Louisville tends to be a lot more open-minded and a lot more open to these orientations, but I have seen in other areas where, you know, how you identify really sort of sets a rank, for lack of a better term, but where you fit on kind of the social pecking order.
Yeah, and I don't think it just happens with this. Ooh, there's a lot of feedback there.
Yeah, I think your speakers might be a little bit loud, Shane.
I don't think it just happens with, you know, I think I've seen it, what you're talking about, this female dominant, you know, you're a traitor to the cause kind of a thing, or male submissive, you're a traitor to the cause. I think that happens too in generally accepted, you know, larger groups too within, you know, female submissives. You know, I've been called a bad submissive before, and I don't totally know what that means, but it has happened more than once. And it is kind of strange how this hierarchy evolves out of us. I think it's because the group is small enough that everyone knows about each other, but big enough that people can kind of pack up in certain groups. And I don't get it. I don't get the motivation to say that you're a traitor or that you're bad at this or that you're bad at that. I don't get that sort of insecurity. I don't understand it. I see it, but I can't really answer the question what it's about.
Well, I think that's pretty. I think that's pretty obvious that it does come from the insecurity. But go ahead, Shane.
No, yeah, I was going to say, quite frankly, I mean, as sad as it is to say, limited dating pool. So you have to set yourself apart from the others, because what I've noticed is when people get real vocal about their role, about their power orientation, almost invariably they are single. You get one of those people in a relationship and they quiet down to nothing in a hurry. Their power orientation doesn't change, but they don't feel the need because they're not advertising.
So that kind of rolls into a thought that I've been having. You know, when we're talking about labels and why are they important and why do we care? Josie, you say they're useful. I agree with you. I agree. Everybody defines these things different. You know, what's a good submissive or a bad submissive, or what's a submissive, or the difference between a submissive and anything else. I mean, obviously there's, you know, a spectrum of definitions that we all hold for these words, but still we use them, and I think that they are useful. So people try to select those labels carefully, but is it mainly as a? Is that why we want to sort each other out, you know, into piles like that? Because that's how we know who can play, you know, who's compatible with me for either relationship, sex, or play, or all of the above?
Yeah.
If it's the single people that seem to be most vocal about their orientation.
Yeah. And maybe, I think Shane has a point too. There may be something to it about ranking yourself in respect to that other person. You know, are you, you know, if you fall into the same category, you can kind of figure out where you stand in relation to that person. It's not a mature thing to do, but I think it definitely does happen. And again, it's just kind of eases that conversation, or I think it makes you feel like you have common ground. It's not always coming from a malicious place. Sometimes it's coming from I don't know how to talk to you, I don't know what to talk to you about, but if I know that you identify the same as me, maybe we can talk about that, or you know, maybe our boyfriends are similar, or our partners are similar, and we can talk about that too.
Right, sure, because when I'm thinking of a more vanilla analogy, I'm thinking of the Facebook relationship status. Okay, so people select somebody that they say that they are in a relationship with. And there are 100 reasons why somebody might decide to put that on their Facebook profile. And not all of them are good. You know, is that their way of saying, "Hey, I'm taken"? So, you know, is this all just an exercise to put people in the like not fuckable category and fuckable, you know, available and unavailable? It could be that they really are stricken in love with this person and want to sort of, you know, venerate that by posting it and shouting it from the rooftops. I mean, I get that too. It's not my style, but when people change their orientations on FetLife, or, you know, make a post, or, you know, even a journal entry about their change from this to that, is that just mostly seen as an advertisement?
I think it can.
Yeah, not just an advertisement, but I think it's almost in some cases a warning. I've seen it a lot when people go from sort of switching from the bottom to the top as a permanent change. It's like, hey, you used to relate to me this way, but that way is not going to be acceptable anymore. I now expect, you know, instead of calling me Jane, you must call me Mistress Jane or whatever it is. Like I said, I've seen some that to me don't necessarily seem to be coming from a positive place. And it's almost like a reaction to a way that they felt that they were treated as a result of their label.
Yes, the way that they're treated as a result of their label is very interesting, because I was involved with somebody a while ago who was kind of straight-ish, you know, mostly straight, and they. You know, sometimes they like to have sex with girls, sometimes they like to make out with girls, and I was trying to sort of pick that apart. Like, why do you call yourself straight all the time? I mean, you kiss an awful lot of girls to call yourself straight. I mean, come on. She was like, well, I'm probably a little less straight than I put off, but I don't want to be out there as the bisexual slave. Because then if I'm unattached, it brings an entire, people treat me differently. You know, if you're bisexual, that means, well, you'll obviously be up for hanging out with me and my slave so that we can all get dirty together. You know, she was she had an internal orientation that was authentic and a little fluid, and not something that maybe you could describe with one simple word. But she didn't want to put that out there. She wanted, hey, especially, you know, for all of you who don't know me, for all intents and purposes, I'm straight, is what she was saying. Do people do that with their orientations as well?
I know somebody who identified as a switch very clearly on FET because they didn't want to have to feel like they had to respond. This was somebody who was new. But they, you know, sort of newer to the community and identified as a switch because they wanted to be able to turn on, you know, angry bitchy face if somebody came at them hot, and not have to go, well, the good submissive in me would try to find some polite way of saying this, but now they can go, I am switch, hear me roar. And I think that takes out, to Josie's point, some of people's humanity. And what this person discovered about themselves was really that they were a bottom, you know, they were submissive and really, really submissive, but that they always equated that being submissive with having to behave a certain way, that for some reason being a submissive meant you couldn't stand up for yourself. And, you know, when they'd come to that sort of realization that you could just be a person and a submissive, and I realize that's as odd as it sounds. I realize it sounds stupid when it comes out of my mouth. But the point is that there's a lot of people that have these impressions about what the label implies, even for themselves, let alone what it means to other people. And so when they came to this realization that it didn't really affect how they interacted with people at a human level, they were perfectly happy to identify as a submissive, as a bottom, because it didn't mean that they had to accept being treated a particular way.
Yeah.
But in that case, switch was a defense mechanism.
Right. Go ahead, Josie.
No, I mean, I think I never really thought of it in terms like that, but that's probably why I do it. I have kind of a fluid power orientation as well, and I think probably the main reason for that a lot of the time is because I don't like to be shopped for one reason or another. So I don't want somebody shopping for a little or shopping for a submissive or shopping for a top to look in that category and then pick me off of a list, because I don't respond real well when someone comes at me with my orientation in their mind. So if you approach me as, oh, she's a submissive, and then you speak to me in that manner, we're not going to get along from the start. We're not going to get off on the right foot. I'm not going to like it. I just don't like that. And I think when you do identify really loud and proud as one way or another, some people like that, and so it can be a really handy thing. But for me, that's one of the reasons why I probably don't do it, because I'm real uncomfortable with starting off on that. Because I feel like I'm promising something. Like I'm saying I will be, that label comes with a certain list of expectations, and now I'm saying that I will meet those expectations, and I'm not comfortable with that.
It's interesting, Josie. I wonder if part of that, and I'm not going to sit here and analyze you, but I've heard this from other people, where you essentially become fetishized for your label. Like, I'm only interested in you because you are a bottom, or I'm only interested in you because you are a top. Like, I would never talk to you if your FetLife label said top. I would never talk to you. What's the point? Yeah,
and that does open you up for that other conversation of, you meet the person, and now all of a sudden you're trying to figure out if they're a good submissive or a bad submissive. Which is also kind of a silly conversation to me.
Well, if you identify as a switch, clearly you're a bad submissive. I mean,
exactly.
That just goes without saying.
Or you're indecisive, or you're selfish, or you're, greedy.
Right. So is there I guess you're always going to have people in the in-person BDSM community who enjoy the role play, the idea that I'm submissive and I'm, when I'm in public with these people at a restaurant, at a munch, that I behave a certain way. I like to do that, and I like for people to speak to me a certain way. I would rather that all of that went away, me personally. But you're always going to have people who keep that going, and that's not a bad thing. It just seems like it makes labels more important, and it makes changing those labels harder to do.
I think to a certain extent, I totally agree with you. And I think to a certain extent, it kind of cheapens when you make that choice to be with another person, to be that way with another person. So, it can be super, super hot. If I'm in a relationship with somebody and I want them to boss me around and, tell me to sit on the floor and put the collar on and say, this is how it's going to be, that can be super hot. But I don't necessarily want that with everybody, and I want that to be special, that I'm giving that to you specifically. Right. I don't want that to be to everybody.
Right. The person that you are going to do that with is going to know you well enough. They're not going to read it on your profile. They're not going to, know that as a label. Shane, I'm not sure if you heard me before. We're having some feedback issues, and I think there might be your speakers that you're listening with. I think they might be set pretty loud, and it's coming back through your microphone. We're getting like echoes.
I'm really low, but you guys are breaking up on my end. There's all kinds of weird internet shit going.
Okay. Well, it's really not that bad. I just thought we might be able to improve it. So if that's as low as we can go, then we'll just deal with it. We're hitting the halfway point here, and I do want to let everybody know that anybody who's viewing, that they do have the opportunity to ask questions that they'd like addressed by the folks that are involved here in the little video chat room. There's a button up on top for Q&A, and if you'd like to submit a question, I know there are some comments here, and I'll go ahead and read some of these. And this is from the beginning of our conversation, but I think there's some really good thoughts. One viewer says, it happens within a committed relationship, roles can change. It's fluid, we are human, and humans change and evolve. As long as both parties are okay with it, then go for it. Then the next comment says, it sounds like a change, if too radical, simply becomes a fundamental incompatibility, and thus a no-fault end. Sad, but why cling if you're not getting what you want out of the dynamic? I guess, sort of speaking to the idea that sometimes when things change, people need to be willing to walk away if the compromise can't be found, or if the
that would be the mature thing.
The new way forward. Yeah, I suppose it'd be the mature thing, but it's also the hardest thing.
Yeah.
So let's, we can still talk about labels and changing orientations personally in relationships and in the community. But let's talk a little bit in the second half about reputations. First of all, why are reputations important in our in-person kink community?
They're important for the same reason they're important in any community. I mean, any workplace, any friend group, any of that. Your reputation is how people perceive you before they meet you. If they hear about you from somewhere else. In a kink community, they're how people decide whether or not they want to play with you or be involved with you or get advice from you. They're kind of your resume. They're pretty important.
Okay. They're certainly a good icebreaker to your resume.
Yeah.
If I hear, bad things about somebody, I'm going to be less inclined to approach them just to get to know them better, regardless of whether I'm interested in a relationship or not.
Well, I don't disagree with you, Shane, but that probably also depends on how you feel about the person that you got the bad information from, right?
Absolutely, but we're talking about a situation of trust, right? Where if I spend all of my time with somebody and I know them really well, and they say person X did A, B, and C, of course I'm going to believe them because I like to think I'm discerning enough to know if that person has a personal axe to grind. As a general rule, I tend not to take the word of X's at the same level, simply because there's just seems to be a built-in bitterness. Like, I don't mean to sound bitter, but I'm like, oh, here it comes.
Yeah.
Right? Like, that's just the way it goes. Right? So I give X's like full value truth minus, say, 2 on a scale of, like there's automatic skepticism thrown in there. But if I feel like somebody doesn't have a dog in a fight and they have something to say about a person, if that person hasn't demonstrated any reason for me to distrust what they say, of course I'm gonna cast kind of a sidelong glance at that person.
Okay. I think when talking about why reputations are important, I think in the BDSM community, we addressed a few things, but let's not forget safety. That I think that that can go, it's not a foolproof way of vetting people. It's not a foolproof way of keeping yourself safe. It's kind of like, it's like saying safe BDSM. People who say safe sex, they're like, well, there is no such thing as safe sex. Let's start talking about safer sex. Well, BDSM is kind of the same way. There is no safe BDSM, but there can be safer BDSM.
Correct.
And I think that relying on reputation or relying on feedback from other people in the community can go a long way for keeping you safer. And I think that's why we value it so much in the BDSM community as opposed to other social groups, because sometimes we're talking about dangerous shit and sometimes we're talking about very personal stuff, the sexy stuff, the stuff that, that's private, that you want to make sure that this person not only knows what they're doing, knows how to do it safely, knows how to be discreet about it to the people that it matters, around you. But, the stakes get a lot higher than when we're talking about other, the hiking club, for instance.
Yeah. And we don't want to be dramatic about it, but you are talking about, within a BDSM community, you're talking about risk, you're talking about physical health, mental health, sexual health, and that general risk of being outed or being more out than you would like to be. Those are very real elements. So I completely agree with you.
Okay. So
the issue that I have are people that will play with people. Like I said, the one thing that's important to me about reputation is this somebody that I want to continue to get to know better? And that's what the reputation for me will do. But I think if anybody plays with somebody... Now, I realize that you always have something. But I've seen people who will go to parties and say, "Oh, that guy's really cute. I'd love to play with him." "Oh, is that guy safe to play with?" "Yes, he is," without really taking the time to get to know that person. And again, there's a certain amount of rushing into it where, based on
Well, I think we may have lost Shane there.
Oh, no.
person, if I have some kind of vested interest in getting to know them.
Okay. We missed a little bit of what you said, but that's okay. I think we got the gist of it.
It just put in ranting, you'll be fine. Like at some point if they start,
right.
caption, it'll just say ranting.
When I go back and I edit the video and there's this blank space of audio, we'll just put wah, 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 wah.
And Shane rolled on.
No, I feel you on that point, except, you and I are on the same page as far as vetting people and liking to know people before playing with them. I mean, of course, that depends on what kind of play that you're talking about and how important it is that you trust somebody. But not everybody sees it that way. They see it, well, this is a public party, and there's, I'm relatively safe here, and if I want to play with somebody that I just, I only know their name, then I'm trying not to be judgy about that, because that's not the way I roll, but that doesn't mean that other people don't roll that way, and that's okay too.
I'm willing to take a knock on this one, okay? I'm willing to take a hit, because we're talking about reputation, and we're talking about what we hear about other people. But the reality of it is that reputation in terms of a community like ours is based on what people say. And I will tell about other people, and I have no doubt that I am an active participant in some people's reputations, both good and bad, and I think we all are. I think anybody who gets asked anything, it is...
Wah, 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 wah. All right. Well, maybe he'll come back to us. You have anything to add, Josie?
Well, that makes sense. I mean, he's right. He's making this point of you're an active participant in someone else's reputation. Mm-hmm. And with that is going to come some responsibilities, but also, that's a reason that could give you pause about taking somebody's reputation from another person. Because it's created by word of mouth. And if those mouths are maybe not good caretakers of the truth or have a personal axe to grind, but I got to tell you, most people who I have met and their reputation has preceded them, it's been accurate.
Yeah.
That's been my experience as well.
Yeah, I mean, it's not usually super off base. And the more of a record that person seems to have, like people who have a very long-standing reputation, it seems to just make it truer, not more false, in my opinion, in my experience.
Well, the only point that I would dispute is that reputations are made, formed, sort of forged by word of mouth. I think it's very often observation.
Sure, but after observation that word gets spread. I mean, and I'll give you an example as generically as I can, Michael. There have been people who have behaved a certain way in a public setting where we've gone, you can't behave that way, and then we've all, based on that collective experience, gone and talked to somebody else and said, oh my God, you can't believe what so-and-so did at the party.
Okay.
I mean, our word of mouth is based on the experience.
Gotcha. All right.
Like, I'm sure we had to shut the dungeon down because of you, but guess what? People are going to hear about it because we all had to hear about it. And we want to share that pain.
Right.
Not naming any names.
But let's say somebody... How does somebody with a good reputation go to having a... How much does a good reputation count in this community, as far as safety and integrity of character and so on? Some people, I think some people are under the impression that that's sort of immutable, that they don't have to they don't have to behave well anymore because
yeah, but everybody
they've
thinks that
attained
reputation.
Everybody thinks what?
Everybody thinks they have a good reputation.
Right. So even their reputation has a reputation? Is that...
To them it does, I think. I don't doubt it, right? Like, it's really interesting. Like, I will say this, and I'm going to say this sort of, encoded. There's a few people who will know, but when I came into the community originally, I didn't come in alone. I came in with somebody else who I would say did not have the best reputation for things like reliability or perhaps honesty. And what happened was, because I was a new commodity, I got painted with that brush, and it took me a long time to come out from under that. But I didn't realize that that was the perception that people have had of me. I would meet people and I would talk to them, and we had a great time, and it was only, in some cases, years later where people were like, I really had the wrong impression of you. I had no idea anything was wrong, right? Because they'd had this preformed notion of who I was because of who I was with. And it took me a while, unknown to me, to crawl out from under that.
Okay. Well, isn't that an argument for reputation is a bunch of bullshit anyways? That why do we rely on these things when you get painted with the brush of the person that you're standing next to?
Very simply, because I will paint a brush with people who are with people as well.
Okay.
Like, if you can't tell that that person's an idiot, then you must be an idiot. You know what I mean?
So are you saying you were an idiot?
No, I'm saying that people's perception, I don't blame people for their perception is what I'm saying. Like, I'm not going to sit here and go, well, that's not fair, I was a nice guy. Mm-hmm. What I'm saying is I was unaware that that was the perception.
Well,
Maybe
and you
that
were
was
new,
naive
so
on
you were
my
earning
part.
your reputation still.
What's that?
Well, you were new, so you were still earning your reputation. It's not like you came in and then you got seen with this person and then everyone's opinion of you changed. They met you one way, and then you had to kind of reverse their initial impression.
Exactly.
Yeah. I don't think that it's at all fair to say that someone with a good reputation doesn't need to, dot their I's and, cross their T's. I think they still do. You probably have a little bit of grace you can work with there. I think I have a reasonably good reputation, and if I fucked up in some way, I think I'd be shown a little grace the first or second or third time. But I think if you're doing things that are empirically bad, everybody agrees that it's bad or in poor taste, I think it still reflects on you, whether you have a good reputation or not. People talk at a staggeringly fast pace and with, fast frequency, so I don't think that's true.
So does it work as a one-to-one exchange in the bank account? A good deed earns you $1 and a shitty remark costs you $1?
No, everything's on a spectrum, depending on what you do. Every offense and every good deed, I think, have different values.
Okay.
Although I will say that ruining your reputation is a much easier process than building it up.
Seems to be a faster one, depending on...
Yeah, I mean, that decline is pretty quick.
Depending on what you do, if you throw a good party, I've noticed that some people's reputations immediately become impeccable because they throw a good party, or they're a good host. Maybe they're generally a jerk, or they have had bad experiences in the past, but that stuff can weigh really heavily in your favor.
Well, that's interesting, because we do have, actually one of the comments here in our Q&A says, I see a difference in reputation based on 2 factors, play and relationship dynamic. It's easy at times to speak about someone's play rep if you've seen them play in public, but relationships are something you barely see the tip of an iceberg, so they're harder to vet. Now we're adding another dimension to that. There's another kind of reputation out there that has nothing to do with your play and has nothing to do with your relationships, but it's how awesome your party is, or how many cool people you know and how many interesting things that you've done and so on, that sort of add to your reputation. But when people mistake somebody who throws a good party and opens their home to the community for some great times, when they mistake that for, personal integrity, that's, I think, where it becomes a problem. All right, no comments on that.
No, I mean, I guess I'm having a hard time with it because I have known people who have had really, for lack of a better term, mixed reputations. And there are some people that you know well enough that they'll say, you know, they host a great party, but I don't know that I would ever hang out with them alone. You understand what I'm saying? Like, some people have these very compartmentalized relationships. You understand what I'm saying?
Well, there's another comment here that people tend to remember the bad easier than the good. Do we think that's true? In that case, it's harder to repair a damaged reputation. It's easier to fall from grace than to build it.
Yeah, and if you're always, you know, on your best behavior and you make one, you know, catastrophic or small mistake, people, you know, might be more inclined to remember your mistake than all your good deeds if you've had a bunch of, you know, nice little good deeds and then one huge relationship mistake, you know. They thought you were great and then you went on a date with that guy who everyone agrees is an asshole. They might then start to question, well, you know, maybe you're not as normal or as all right as we thought you were. I think that does happen.
Well, when we're talking about reputation and why it's important in our community, and we talked about safety and we talked about sort of mentorship and things like that, what does having a good reputation get you? You get invited to the best parties. I mean,
Yeah.
people want to sit at your table at the munch, or is this?
More likely to be friendly.
I'll give you my perception, but that's all it is because I don't know, right? We don't know necessarily authentically what our relationship or our reputation is outside of the purview of what people are saying around us. But I'll tell you what my belief is about what my reputation does for me. And one of the things that people have told me I have a reputation for, again, this is just what I hear, I'm not trying to project, is that I'm really easy to talk to. And that's good for me because I like talking to people. I like getting to know them. And if my reputation was that I'm a dick or that I talk behind people's backs or that I say things about people, they're not going to be interested in talking to me, and I lose out on that opportunity to meet interesting people. So it behooves me to maintain, you know, sort of my integrity as it relates to the conversations that I have, which, of course, builds its own reputation.
Okay, so it gets you what it gets you the things in the community that you like.
That I'm interested in, sure.
Okay. And I guess that's probably the key to everything, because if we're talking about play, then a good play reputation will probably get you more of what you're looking for in that regard. Yeah, I was wondering, like, I mean, I hate to always we were talking about labels, like, why are labels important? Well, why is reputation important? Is it all really just about getting laid? You know, is what the question that I'm trying to, why is having a good, why do I care what somebody else thinks about me unless I'm trying to have a relationship with them or get in their pants?
But here's the thing, I do have an answer for that, Michael.
Yes.
And I think your reputation is only as valuable to you as what you want to use it for. Like I said, if I have a reputation as being somebody that's worthwhile to talk to, that's good for me because I like to talk to people. So my reputation either benefits me or hurts me based on what it is I want to get out of it. So I have met people who are really interested in public play. They like to play with different people. They like to play with different styles. So if they had a reputation as a good player, sex aside, right? They want to have a reputation as being a skilled player or somebody who's got a specific area of expertise. You know, and you see this sometimes in some of these subgroups of people who participate in a lot of the same stuff, like the rope group. Like, oh, if you're going to get tied up, I would go talk to so-and-so because they're really good. So there is a certain amount of skill set reputation that I think is good for people who want to expand. You know, there's some people who don't want to teach to people who are dicks. So your bad reputation, you know, you're not less necessarily going to get those tips and tricks from people that you respect because they don't respect you back. So I think your reputation is always good for whatever area you want to go in. I know some people who have a great reputation as a presenter, and that gets them the opportunity to present at more places.
And if they like presenting, then that's a great
right,
thing.
That's what I'm saying, though. But I mean, I've seen some people who really, really, really love to present. They really want to get out there and teach, but they're not real good at it. And I realize that you're passionate about this, but you know, we've got to fill an hour of space, and we need somebody who can really do that well. And unfortunately, you know, we've given you some opportunities, and your reputation just hasn't followed along. And unfortunately, if we put your name on it, have already heard from people saying, well, that's just a blank space for us. We're going to go somewhere else.
Yeah, but I don't think it's fair to say the reputation.
So I think reputation does matter there.
Go ahead, Josie.
I don't think a reputation is only as good as what you want to use it for. Like, you know, you only want a good reputation because you need to exploit it to get laid or to get a job or to get a partner or whatever. You know, it's certainly helpful for all of those things, but I think I have a good reputation and I don't use it for, I mean, I'm sure I would use it for those reasons in the appropriate circumstance, but mostly I think it just feels good to me to have a high level of integrity. And to me, if I have a good reputation, that speaks to a high level of integrity, and that makes me feel good about me. And I don't think I'm the only one who feels that way. I think having a good reputation among friends can just kind of give you the warm fuzzies in a nice way. I don't think it's always a means to an end.
No, I would agree with you that it's kind of its own reward when you can build something like that.
Well, and it's usually the people who are nurturing their reputation as a means to get laid are usually the ones who have a bad reputation. Or who have a reputation that is characteristic. It's very often changing, you know? They have a good one and they have a really bad one. They have a good one and they have a bad one. Because it usually goes with their relationships because they've used it as currency to get engaged with different people and it's not worked out that well.
To a point you made earlier, Josie, I find people that want to talk about their reputation or how good their reputation is generally don't have a good one.
Right.
I mean, to me, one of the hallmarks of having a good reputation is that it exists on its own.
Yeah. I never want to be the person
it's like
that
they said, anytime anybody says, trust me, the first thing I do is reach for my wallet.
Yeah. And I never want to be the person that says, don't you know who I am? You know. That's somebody that has to, you know, put their reputation out there and use it as currency in that situation. Sometimes we use experience as currency in the same way, kind of like, you know, one of our previous topics. But we have touched a little bit on this in other conversations as well. I think it was one of our past participants who doesn't really participate much in the in-person activities in the community was asking about repairing a damaged reputation for whatever reason, you know. Is there anything that can damage a reputation beyond redemption?
Yeah, I think usually the ones that damage your reputation beyond redemption are the ones that are repetitive. I think very rarely is it a singular offense that makes everybody, you know, just unilaterally decide that you're a bad guy or that I'm not going to trust you going forward. I have found it's those people who make the same mistake over and over or who make different mistakes over and over, and that just at a certain point, that's the person that I just kind of write off and decide, in my mind, you're never going to have a good reputation. You could start now and be a squeaky clean, you know, individual for the rest of your life, and I'm still kind of done with you. I think there are very rare instances where it can be a single offense, but they'd have to be pretty bad.
Right, and there is a time factor that I sometimes have to, you know, put into this. You know, my opinion of somebody 8 years ago when they were in the community, and then they left and they came back, and maybe they didn't have such a great reputation. Maybe I didn't care for them much personally, but, you know, is it beyond redemption? Well, it's been 8 years. I think maybe they probably deserve another chance.
Yeah.
Without anything
the
else
flip
happening.
side of that, Michael, is interesting.
Mm-hmm. No, go ahead.
No, what I was saying is that the flip side of that is that, you know, as a function of time and it relates to reputation, you know, you and I have been around a fairly long time, you longer than I, but at least in this community, I mean, my presence here in Louisville is now a decade. You know, and I'm getting to that point now where I can start to count on my fingers how many people who have been here longer than me, at least in the active community. I know there's a lot of people who are still around, but they don't come out anymore. So in terms of the faces that you see, you know, I can remember when that person started showing up and that person started showing up. So from their perspective, their perception of me, my reputation, as it were, is based on the entirety of their experience with me.
Yeah, and that might have been you 8 years ago, and you're saying that might not have been such a great reputation.
Exactly. And, the thing is, I guess that's part of it as well, is that my reputation constantly gets reformed by the addition of new people.
Mm-hmm.
If our reputation is a collection of the things people say, the more people that show up that are new, that have good things to say, it starts to, you're still going to have some guy who knew you 10 years ago, no, that guy's a dick, he'll always be a dick, he's never going to be anything but a dick. And people who've known me for 6 years are going, I have no idea what you're talking about, this guy's awesome.
Mm-hmm.
That's a really good point.
It's a very good point. That it's also a problem, though, when we're talking
absolutely.
about
Yes.
new blood into the community. Is a great opportunity to repair damaged reputation. But sometimes it's that damaged reputation. It's a way of laundering it, I suppose.
Yeah.
Because there aren't enough people who remember how shitty that person was, or the terrible thing that they did, or the awful breakup. I mean, whatever it was that made people go, that person's kind of, I don't want to be around them. It's like a constant influx of new 50 Shades crowd, and and then the exodus of the people that are just kind of moving other places or getting out of the lifestyle or whatever. And sometimes you feel like, no, wait a minute, it wasn't that long ago. You're not done paying your penance here. You're not allowed to have people adore you already.
Right, but I think it depends on what they did, because honestly, at a certain point, we become the people that are being petty. Because if you did a bad thing 4 years ago, and now there's been such quick turnover in the community that only 2 people remember that bad thing that you did, and now that person has a good reputation because there's a general consensus among all the new people that that guy's a good guy, at a certain point, you gotta, depending on the offense, you gotta kind of let it go. If everyone else agrees now that he's a good guy, you can still decide that you don't like him, but I don't know. I think you can kind of become shitty yourself hanging on to that, depending on the offense. But, and you can always give your opinion of that person, but, you have to just kind of embrace it. Sometimes the consensus is going to change.
I said earlier where I understand what my perspective can do. And I'm not saying that I have the ability to change somebody's reputation. I'm not saying that at all. But if a reputation is a collection of things that you hear, of perceptions, of things that you have experienced and heard, and stuff that you've talked to about, I have no doubt that in some cases, like you said, based on the offense, that I have gone out of my way to ensure that some people's reputations have not improved maybe as far as some people think they might have or should have. Mm-hmm. Because I do hang on to some of that stuff, because for me, again, based on the offense, they were significant enough. I just felt that this whitewashing of the past was not good. Not good for the community. Not a fight I have a dog in, but overall.
But I think that's rare. I mean, when that happens, I think it usually is happening for the right reason. So people who say, I can't get a clean slate because, people are trashing me from 5 years ago, usually that's not the case. Usually you now have a bad reputation because you've continued to nurture a bad reputation with people that know you. So I don't usually give a lot of credit to those people who are saying, it's not me, it's, people like Shane, they're giving me a bad rep. No, usually it's because even the new people don't like you.
So what are we saying, to improve a bad reputation, or to right a mistake, or to, sort of improve your standing, what does somebody do?
I will tell you. I know the answer to this question.
The answer.
Now, the
Lay it
answer,
on us.
the answer. You ready for this?
Yes.
Your reputation is formed by perception, by how people see you. And we have talked a lot about people who either brag too much or talk too much or do this or do that. What I have found, especially in terms of damaging your reputation, people who have damaged their reputation, who are generally good people, so they have this good reputation and they've done something that has hurt their reputation, the people that I have seen that have improved their reputation are the people who understood that they made a mistake and worked on fixing their mistake for their own sake, not for the sake of what it was going to do to their reputation. As Josie said, the people who think or concern themselves with their reputation are generally the ones who can't improve it. The people who are genuinely trying to improve themselves are the ones who are genuinely going to improve their reputation because they are genuinely getting better as people.
Yeah, and
I think if you try to repair your reputation, you will fail. If you try to repair yourself, your reputation will follow, or can follow.
That's a really nice way of putting it. I think you have to apologize. That's one of the things that I would do. If you did something bad to somebody and that person is probably going to be trash-talking you or, you know, telling other people that you're a dick, you should apologize. I mean, that's one of the easiest things to do, and people never do it. It's like normal social rules don't apply to the community, and they do. You should say you're sorry, and you should try to improve in the future. I think some people take breaks. They'll, you know, sit a few rounds out and just kind of get their shit together or let it cool off, depending on what they did. I've noticed people have done that, and it's worked pretty well for some people.
Mm-hmm.
You also have to be able to admit you made a mistake.
Right.
Right.
That's a big one.
Let me tell it's a story that I want to tell, and it might take a minute, but it's very, very much relevant to what we're talking about, and it was something that really impressed me. And I'm not going to get into names or specifics, but there was a community where one of the leaders in the community, actually a couple leaders in the community, did a really bad thing, something terribly egregious and illegal. One of them kind of skipped Dodge, got the fuck out, and actually tried to reinvent themselves somewhere else. The other one kind of stuck around and tried to sort of pin it all on the other guy. And the rest of us were kind of sitting around going, no, that's bullshit, you know. You're not owning your part of this. It all crashed and burned very badly, and a huge schism in the community, just problems and people taking sides and so on. Well, they decided to sort of duck under cover for a little while. The next time we saw the snorkel come up for air was at a conference where they were listed as presenters, which was problematic for some people in that, you know, some people feel that people who present or are put up as teachers or educators in this community should adhere to some, you know, minimum standard of integrity. The big problem was that their class was about integrity, like having integrity. And everybody went, whoa, hang on, you know. And they were like contacting the conference, like, do you know who these people are? And do you know what they did? And, you know, you have them teaching a class on, you know. No, so they got shut down. Basically, the organizer said, I had no idea. Thank you for letting us know. Well, some years went by, and I saw the snorkel peek up again, and they were going to teach somewhere else. So immediately I'm like, all right, what are they doing now? Because you know, these are people who did a very bad thing. But the class that they were teaching changed from integrity to the class title was called When You're Out of Integrity. Basically, it was a class on what you do when you fucked up so badly and you need to come back in. You need to repair that, and you need to make it right. And they decided to do a class on that, and I was very happy to see that. And I have a very different opinion of those people now. And you would have thought that this thing that happened would have been beyond redemption. So I think that's a pretty good example of, you know, we were talking about, you know, what can you do to get a bad reputation? I mean, you can play past safe words, you can non-consensual things, you can out somebody, you can. I mean, there are a lot of things that you could do. You could just be a dick and hard to talk to, and
Be emotionally unstable.
Yeah, you could be, you know, flaky. You might be a gossip. I mean, there are a lot of things that could earn you a bad reputation, but I think for somebody who's interested in repairing their reputation, I don't, you know, especially with some time, because if they had done that in the first year that all of this happened, I still wouldn't have bought it. I said, no, fuck that. Don't, they don't belong teaching anybody anything. But enough time had passed, and that does heal a little bit. So I don't know where they are now. I don't know what they're doing. Maybe they're on a new path or something. But I just thought it was an interesting story, completely, relevant to what we're talking about here, as far as repairing reputations, and what helps me to improve my vision of someone else and their reputation to me is that they own their part of it and that they're trying to do better. End rant. Done.
No, I think it's a worthwhile story to bring up and a worthwhile point, because that's the offense in that was a general community-wide empirically bad thing that people did. That goes for relationships too, though. If you have a really bad breakup with somebody, that can really screw up your reputation. Either because the other person told everybody about stuff that they thought you did that was wrong, or because other people witnessed that thing that you did that was shitty, or the general opinion is just that they thought you broke up poorly.
Mm-hmm.
I've seen someone do that in the last year, and it was really amazing, because my opinion of that individual went way down. Way down.
Yeah.
I didn't want to have anything to do with that person. I was totally appalled, which is funny because I really liked that person before this happened. And now I'm very friendly with that person because I saw them go out of their way to make amends with that partner that they broke up with in a spectacular fashion. And they kind of went out of their way to just kind of be a generally positive community member because they knew that their reputation had taken a hit. And it worked out beautifully, and I thought it was a really great example.
Good. Now let's talk about reputations in a different light, rather than good or bad, or in terms of saved up capital. Well, first let me read a comment here, because I do think it's spot on here. A good reputation can afford you the benefit of the doubt, because everything that you say and do is often interpreted through the filtered lens of your reputation.
Yes.
So even in cases of doubt, a good reputation will work for you. People are more likely to believe somebody with a good reputation than a bad reputation.
Yeah.
So that is one of the other reasons why some people probably care about their reputation.
Well, and even if you do a bad thing, it's seen as less bad if you're seen as a super positive person.
Yeah, or that's like really out of the ordinary, and I would never have thought that person, it kind of softens it a little bit, or at least makes it easier to repair, I suppose. But one of the reasons why we were talking about changing reputations wasn't about changing it from a bad to good or a good to bad. It was about just reputations in general. Whether it's as the sickest motherfucker sadist in the room, or the flakiest, weirdest, whatever, just reputations, This person is the rope person. That's the person you go to learn some rope. Well, if you want the reputation of being this person or that person, or, if, for a while there, Shane was the fire cupping guy. Fire cupping, go to Shane. He's the guy for it. Well, because we were seeing him at parties, he was doing it. Because the more he did it, the more people asked him for it. And so it just kind of fed itself.
But to be fair, the more I did it, the more times I got to do it without setting anybody on fire.
Yes, you earned
the
a reputation.
Reputation grew naturally out of doing it.
But see, to me, you've always been the braided leather whip guy. So, when this conversation came about because there was a new person who was coming in who was looking for some sort of service top. Like, I want to experiment. I want to try some of these things. I'm looking for somebody who is safe, et cetera, et cetera. And apparently there was a person sitting at the table, and they were like, well, I can help. I wasn't there for this, so I'm paraphrasing. Maybe I get some of the details wrong. Like, I can help you with that. and they were like, "Oh no, you don't want to play with him. He's like a sick bastard, like crazy sadist, like he would be, after you've gotten all the experience and whatever." And the guy was kind of sitting there baffled, like, maybe you've seen me play like that before, but do you not think that I can temper this? That I don't realize that this is a brand new person? But he has a reputation of being very creative as a player. He has a reputation of being very humiliating as a player, and about, being kind of evil. And that's stuck to him. And I don't know that he likes the fact that that's stuck to him. So how do you go about tempering that, or getting the reputation, like Shane? How do you get the reputation for being the fire cupping dude? You do fire cupping at every dungeon party for the next, 2 months. That's how you become the fire cup. And don't light anybody on fire. That's how you become the fire cupping dude.
Right, but it's interesting because it's amazing to me how limiting people's reputations can be. To use that same example, right, I was actually there when that happened, and that's exactly kind of, obviously paraphrased, but yeah, I mean, if that showed up in a court transcript and I had to read it, I would go, yeah, that's exactly what happened. But I have talked to people who are bottoms as well, who have said they have a hard time finding play partners because their reputation is they like to play this particular way, and if a top doesn't play that way, then they don't want to approach them, which is interesting because that same person developed that reputation playing with their partner, playing with a specific person. And so what has happened is that when that bottom went looking for other people to play with, they went, well, I could never do that. So, because that was her reputation. And what she was saying was, I don't want you to do that. I have that. I want something else. But because of her reputation, she found it hard to find play partners because they thought they had to be this certain thing to be a good partner to them.
See, but this is interesting because when that person is developing that reputation, because they're making a point to go to every party and play the same way with the same person, they love having that reputation. And you know what? Cry me a river that people want to come to you because you're the sexy whip guy or you're the super sadist knock you around guy. Seriously, because they love it when they love it. And then suddenly one person says, oh, hey, you're too hardcore for me. And they're like, what? I can't believe you limit me like this. Like, as a community, how shitty are you to pigeonhole me? Whoa. You earned that reputation based on your behavior. If you don't like it, why don't you just turn around and tell that person, oh, hey, no, I've just, I have sides.
I have range.
I have layers.
Yeah.
You can talk about this if you want. Like, use your words.
So you're saying that some of these people not only have earned that reputation, but they've cultivated that reputation.
Yeah, and then they turn around and get mad at you because you've now given them that reputation in your mind. It's not like it came out of thin air.
Right, but there are some reputations that do develop in a way that perhaps isn't intended. And I'll give you like a personal example of someone that I know who developed a reputation that their preference was for a particular style of play. And it wasn't even with me, it's just that when the opportunities to play with particular people came up, that was the style of play that they chose to engage in with that person. Okay? And it happened 3 or 4 times. Well, going forward, this is clearly somebody who has some experience who said, I would love to play with you, and their answer was, well, but I don't play in that way. And it was actually a style, not a how hard, not a how easy. It was just a particular style. So let's just say, you saw somebody play with 4 different people and they did wax play, and they said, I want to play with you, and it's like saying, well, I don't do wax. Well, that's not what I'm looking for, and it's not all that I do. It just happened to be that I had these opportunities, and that's what you saw. And I have seen that happen where, people get a perception of a style that people want to engage in. And to your point, Josie, about sort of having a reputation as a bottom and being a particular way, your personality and your relationship style and how you choose to present that are very fluid because you don't want to get boxed in to that kind of thing. But if people aren't aware of how other people might be perceiving those actions, it creates a reputation, not a good reputation, not a bad reputation, just a reputation for style, perhaps, that can follow you and actually make it more difficult because you fall into a category you perhaps didn't intend to fall into. And yeah, I understand
right,
people
but
who
if
cultivate a reputation and then complain about it after the fact, but in some cases, it's something that just kind of follows you.
Right,
Yeah,
but if
Josie.
I've been boxed in as a certain way, then, and I don't like it, or I would like it to be known that I'm into different things, it is now on me to use my words and to articulate that I am a different way, or that I, am interested in something else. That's on me. That's
Right.
not on anybody else.
So if I have the reputation as the biggest, baddest, sickest, sadist, cruelest motherfucker, and somebody doesn't want to play with me because they're not there, or that's not the kind of play they like, and I can't convince them that I can do other things and we don't have to play on 12, we can dial it down to 5 if that's what you want, then that really just speaks of a lack of trust, in
Yeah, and
that.
do you really want to play with that person anyway if they're not going to believe you, no matter how much you're trying to explain about yourself, who you are probably an expert on? I don't
Right.
want to be involved with them anyway.
Right, but,
So what-
but I should point out, though, that at least in the example I'm giving, I'm not talking about a caricature. I'm talking about a real person that tried to talk to somebody about engaging in play that didn't involve that, and this person that she was talking to just got it in their mind based on the reputation that even if I play in a different style, and that's what they want, I'm not going to be able to give them the same experience that these other people did. And so I'm not going to be interested in. No matter how much you communicate that, the reputation becomes, let's not say it becomes a stopping point, but certainly it becomes a hurdle that even with good communication becomes more difficult to get over.
Yeah, but it sounds to me like that person's really insecure anyway, so no matter what your reputation had been, it would have been difficult. That person's
Possibly.
intimidated. That person's intimidated by that other person's reputation. They don't think they're going to live up to that experience. Well, I don't think you're going to get over that. I mean...
Well, what happens when you're tired of your
Right,
reputation?
but good, bad, or indifferent, the person that has that reputation is the one that has to deal with it.
Well, you could always do something radical. If you've got the reputation, like, if that guy who has that reputation of being the kind of person who, I don't know, smacks you in the face and humiliates you on a dungeon floor, if they don't want that reputation, you could do the drastic thing and snuggle somebody at the next one. Piece by piece. I'm serious. Piece by piece, go do some fluffy shit if you want your reputation to change, or if you want to convince people and you feel that everyone is super convinced in the other direction. It sounds silly, but it works.
Right, but then that gets to the point, though, where you're doing things for the sake of your reputation, not doing things that you want to do.
Well, if it bothers you, that's the way that you can change it. If it doesn't bother you,
it didn't bother this person because they weren't aware that happened until they found out. You understand what I'm saying?
Yeah.
They didn't know that. Again, like I said, I didn't realize that I had a less than stellar reputation because I thought I was doing great until somebody told me otherwise. And that was the part that became a problem. Was I thought everything was great. I was just doing what I wanted to do. I was enjoying myself. But then I found out that people are afraid or wanting to play with me because they think they have to do X in order for me to feel like I've had a good scene with them or a good relationship with them or whatever. They didn't know that existed because they weren't cultivating it. It just appeared based on other people's perception of that. That's what I'm saying. Is it was a bit of a shock to find out that you have a reputation.
Yeah, and what happens when when you don't like that reputation? I guess you stage a cuddling if you're trying to soften it a little bit.
But that's exactly it. At what point are you trying to manipulate the reputation?
Right. And Josie, what do you do when the 100th person asks you to draw on them? Because that's become your reputation. You're like the dungeon artist. You just got to enforce the. Not into it tonight. I mean. If you didn't enjoy it so much, you'd just stop doing it in public so much?
No, I mean, if I had that reputation, I mean, I do have that reputation, but if I didn't like it, if people started knowing me in that way, I'm sure I would probably slow down the frequency of doing it or use my words and tell that person who's asked me a million times or the millionth person, I do that sometimes, but I'm not doing that tonight. I use my words. I tell them that. But that can go the other direction too. If I'm getting this reputation of being, I don't think I have this reputation, but if I do have this reputation of being all like only into fluffy shit and nobody wants to beat me anymore because I'm only into fluffy shit, I can understand how that would be frustrating, and I think that's kind of like what Shane is talking about with this other person who had this experience.
Yeah, to that extent, yeah.
I mean, I'm not gonna. I have that option if I want to stage a scene. If I want to take the dramatic nuclear option and go in the dungeon and get my ass beat, you know, I guess I could do that. But my first line of defense would probably be to just start telling people otherwise. The ones who are coming to me and saying, "Oh, you're only into the fluffy shit." You know, if it bothers me enough, I'd probably say something. But again, if I've told you 15 times that you've got me wrong, you've got me pegged a little wrong, and that person's still like, no, I'm not comfortable beating you because you're not really into it, then I don't really like you anymore anyway. I don't want to play with you.
Well, and you keep saying use your words, but it's absolutely true. I mean,
I know, but hold on though, Josie. Let me throw one little twist into there though, and I think this is the important distinction. If you went and asked people to play, and they were like, "Oh, you know what? You know, I appreciate the offer, but I'm not really interested." You know, "Hey, I'm really interested in playing. Oh, I'm not really. You know, thanks. I'm really flattered that you would ask, but I'm not really interested." How many times would that happen before you realize it was because everybody thinks you're into the fluffy shit, and I'm not into the fluffy shit? And if you're coming to ask me to play, I don't really feel like doing that. Do you know what I mean? Like, at what point do you say to somebody who said, "No, I'm not interested," do you go, "Is it because I'm fluffy? Is that why?" And that's what I'm saying. Is that if you're not aware that that reputation exists, you don't know how to negotiate past it. You understand what I'm saying?
Yeah. I don't know that there's a good solution. I mean, I think a lot of times with the reputation, it comes from a little bit of private play, but mostly from public play. It's what other people see you doing. Just like your personal reputation, it's, you know, how you behave and how you interact with people. You know, you can't improve your reputation or change your reputation at a munch by going around and trying to convince everybody that you're not an asshole. You know, if they think you're an asshole, then that's what's going to stick until they observe otherwise. So I don't know how much you can tell people about your specialties and your interests and how much range you actually do have and have it stick. I'm not sure. I think they just have to come to this by themselves, or, you know, if they're interested enough, and talk to you about it and use your words. I thought it'd be an interesting part of this conversation to have. I think we're nitpicking here. I mean, how often does this happen? And, you know, what's the cost of it happening? Oh, somebody doesn't play with me because they think I'm a total hard ass. Well, that's not the end of the world. That's okay. You know, I don't need to fix this. I don't need to fix because I missed out on one scene with one person.
I think the fear, though, is, Michael, is that one scene may represent a trend. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah, I suppose if you see a trend like that and it's not something that you're comfortable with, then you have to start changing your actions or changing, you know, the visible parts of you, I suppose. Anyways, great discussion tonight. We are just about out of time. Did anybody have anything to add to this before we shut it down?
No, that's a good one.
Yeah, I thought there was a lot of topic there for us to chew into. So, thank you to our two guests, and well, me and our two guests, and we will catch you in let's see, not exactly 2 weeks, because we're going to do December 23rd, which is in a week and 5 days, looks like. So. We'll do a slightly early one on December 23rd, and then we'll be back to the every other Thursday until some big holiday interrupts us again. But we're going to stop the broadcast here, and thanks everyone for watching.